Grandmama used to pray, oh Lord, please save them from the evil snares and all the dangers that entangle. Yea, though they walking through the valley of the shadows, just prepare and make them fit for every battle. Because I know they bound to come, and I know they bound to fall, but in your bounty, Lord, preserve their beautiful. Right, we still survive and offer grandma's prayers, surrounded by the jungle and the lion's den. Tread light, cause these traps is inconspicuous. They hide right in plain sight, thinking we don't see them when they linger. Look right beneath the surface, then leave a trail of corpses. Crisis, prices, your life a disposable commodity. Like living in a fantasy, conditioned to believe that the system even cares. Whether selling CDs or walking or driving or reading, look, they don't even need a reason. It's just you breathing and being black. When it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all, at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty. Cause this gritty city got me screaming bloody murder. Said it got me screaming. This gritty city got me on some. Look, get your hand up on my pocket. Distraction, so lazy they use the same tactics. Like condom with some trinkets, just don't let them get to thinking. That light bulb gets to blinking. You know niggas and ideas. Oh dear, my dear, you may not know me, but I know you very well. Foresight, they say hindsight is 20/20. Well, tell me something, we gotta see that history is on repeat. And maybe it takes the beat and the melody to speak a little louder than the message in the clouds or the essence in the air. I swear, my God is just so clear that a system driven by fear can never give us nothing but more of the same things. Oh, when it's such a pretty fall, it don't seem like we falling at all. It's just a GMO dream, where things are never really what they seem. Please cue the violins, tell them just to play me something pretty. Cause this gritty city got me screaming. It's murder. Got me screaming, got me. This gritty city got me on song.
We might not be back, I might be in jail, I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you remember I said, with the last words on my lips, that I am a revolutionary. And you're gonna have to keep on saying that. You're gonna have to say that I am a proletarian. I am the people.
I need that Fred Douglas bro, motherfuckers with the muscles, no strength is in the digits, quit spitting on the bungalow. The devil got a buzz stronger than a bumble nose, lions and impalas, and they creeping through the jungle slow. Warthog pull him over, but the tail light, heart beating fast, and he begging to the jail Christ. You know the one that brothers find in the slammer. Gotta do the running man if they ever find a hammer. Check the grammar. Kelsey ain't Frazier, sitting on the couch with his wrist near a razor. The hood could be good if we loved our neighbor, but the world is so cold, no gas in the pacer. Indiana in the temple of doom, no the slum ain't plum, it resembles a prune. Crime on the regular, look at the coons, is what they do from the treetop, silver for the spoon. No regrets, bro, we do it for the. Don't flex, bro, we do it for the. No rest, bro, we do it for the. No need to guess, bro, we do it for the. No regrets, bro, we do it for the. Don't flex, bro, we do it for the. No rest, bro, we do it for the. No need to guess, bro, we do it for the.
Formerly on my Malcolm Little, but grow up into my Malcolm Unknown. AP like Malcolm Middle, but figure how sun grown is more corner stores, corner pockets and blunt rolls. Get the rolling strips and you know the grip like run nose. Live from where they designated for us to be at, with designated drivers to stay behind on a G-Pack. Toss money with lost money, inspire feedback, and the light come with it, baby. You see that? See that? Be that like nobody ever was. They told us to get it forever on these forever bronze. Said to never be done. The height of ambition is what you leap from. And Suck all that away when you get it, know who to keep from. I'm riding in Tommy Smith, John Carlos, but my jeans are still fit from John Favardos, and I still do mean biz as far as bars go, and my roof is still nowhere near where my car go, for real.
No regrets, bro, we do it for the don't flex, bro, we do it for the no rest, bro, we do it for the no need to guess, bro, we do it for the no regrets, bro, we do it for the don't flex, bro, we do it for the no rest, bro, we do it for the no need to guess, bro, we do it for the
I'm not the pig. You got to make a distinction. The people are going to have to stand up against the pig. That's what the pastors are doing. That's what the pastors are doing all over the world.
What's happening, good people? We are live and direct. This is RSTV on Black Power Media. The intro was Sonny Patterson for folks who want to know. I know that's the most asked question. The song that was just played was from my family Vintage Tux out of Florida. You know what I'm saying? It's called The People. It is a something that we think might end up being a classic one of these days, but I wanted to introduce you all to Vintage Tux and whatnot. If you look closely, you'll see a couple folks you may know. But anyway, again, this is RSTV. I wanted to yesterday mark the 51st anniversary of the New Jersey Turnpike incident with Assata Shakur, Zayd Malik Shakur, and Sundiata Kohli. 51 years ago. That's hard to even think about that. We know that Zayd and one of the cops, transitioned. Zayd became an ancestor. The cop died as well. We also know that Assata and Sundiata was both captured. Assata was shot with her hands up. Assata ended up being liberated 2 years afterwards, after her conviction. And we know that Sundiata Kohli ended up doing 49 years in prison. Sundiata is now 87 years old. We had the opportunity to march through the streets of Philadelphia last week with this good brother. And I wanted to bring on one of their comrades today, a brother who's no stranger to the platform, that's been putting in work for years. I want to bring on our brother and comrade, Dhoruba Bin Wahad. Dhoruba, what's happening, my man? You joined some mute.
Yeah. Can you hear me? Peace out, brother. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I'm good. I got this picture in the background that we took last week. Looking at just it always amazes me just to see, Sundiata just out. You know what I mean? Because we know that, he was held for so long. And, again, it's a blessing to see that, he's still out here rumbling and whatnot. I wanted to bring you on today to kind of give us some background as to who these brothers and this sister, who they are, what they meant to you, and the connection between police terrorism then and now, also political prisoners, because in this particular picture we're here, we was up in Philadelphia, and we was in Philadelphia for another one of the comrades, Mumia Abu Jamal's 70th born day, who you said is still a baby. You know what I'm saying? Mumia turned 70. You said he a baby, and I told you what he said afterwards. So, but he had some choice words as well. So you know what I'm saying. But the love was felt, and it was good to just to build with him for folks who don't know. And like I said, I wanted to talk about that, and also, we can't come on here and not talk about what's going on around the globe in over 50 different encampments, university encampments around the country, and another at least dozen going on around the world. We know that the state is trying to, hunker down on it and try to put a stop to it, trying to criminalize and demonize and all that. But I want to start off talking about who these brothers and sisters were, because of the fact that oftentimes we look at folks like Assata as a folk hero. You understand? You have all these folks, Assata's daughter and her third cousin removed and all this other shit that don't really make no sense. But at the same time, you hardly hear Sundiata Kohli, and you probably never hear Zayd Malik Shakur. So I want to maybe start off with Zayd. Who was Zayd Shakur, and what does he mean to you as far as your legacy, your history?
Well, Zayd was one of my first of all, thanks a lot for having me on the program, Kalonji, and being able to talk to folks that tune in to RSTV and Black Power Media. Shout out to all of y'all. I just want to say thanks. This is an anniversary, albeit it's the anniversary of a tragic confrontation that resulted in my comrade Assata Shakur being wounded and captured, and Sundiata being captured and held prisoner, political prisoner of war for close to 50 years. Now Zayd Malik Shakur came from a long line of Pan-African revolutionaries from the Shakur family in Philadelphia. His dad was a Pan-African and comrade of Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz. Zayd was Deputy Minister of Information for the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party, and later on for the East Coast Ministry of Information for the Black Panther Party. And he was the brother of Lumumba Shakur, who was the lead named defendant in the Panther 21 case, who stood trial with me, and Afeni Shakur and Joan Bird and Setaweo Tabor, and a number of other comrades that were in the Black Panther Party who were put on trial in 1969, 1970 for so-called conspiracies to commit crimes, assaults against the NYPD, on the botanical gardens, and kill flowers and all kinds of mad shit. But so Zayd was the brother of Lumumba Shakur. Lumumba Shakur was a field lieutenant in the Harlem chapter, in the Harlem and Bronx chapter of the Black Panther Party. I was field secretary for the New York chapter of the same party, of the same New York City chapter. I was based in Harlem. And so these comrades and I worked every day together. And we were very, very close. And so when events happened, that was a consequence of the counterintelligence program that divided the party as the West Coast moved more and more to the right and became less and less inclined towards revolutionary struggle and mobilization of African people in the United States. We were demonized and ostracized by the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party at that time. We were supposedly members of the so-called Cleveland faction. And that's all in the history. And I have 300,000 pages of FBI files, COINTELPRO files that are presently at Princeton University. And it basically outlines how the U.S. government went about trying to divide the party and destroy the party, and how our lack of organizational cohesion and regional perceptions contributed to that divide. That's going to be in my book, inshallah. I should try to complete this year. I know I've been talking about that for years, but So Zayd was he was the deputy minister of information first for the Harlem chapter, and then for the whole East Coast. So he played a key role in building our face-to-face relationship with other organizations in New York and in New Haven and on the East Coast in Baltimore and Washington, D.C., chapters that I helped organize. The chapters that we helped organize, of course, were in D.C., Philly, Boston, and New York, New Haven, and where else? The Bronx, of course, and Westchester. So, in fact, seeing that you mentioned Mumia was an information cadre in the Philadelphia branch of the Black Panther Party. So he was technically, in terms of the command and control structure of the Black Panther Party at that time, he was technically under the leadership or the direction of the Ministry of Information, which was headed on the East Coast by Zayd Malik Shakur. Now, Assata Shakur was at first a NCCF, that's a National Committee to Combat Fascism cadre or member, and the Black Panther Party. This is right before the Black Panther Party's ranks were closed to new members, and it was only permitting people who wanted to join the party to become activists or NCCF community workers. And I personally had brought Assata down to the Harlem office and had her fill out a membership form so that she could sort of like skip past that process, and she became a full-fledged cadre member of the Black Panther Party. Her expertise was medical care. She was in the medical cadre because she was practicing studying nursing at City College. She wanted to go into the medical field, and of course, the Black Panther Party had medical cadre. That is, we had free health clinics. We had testing sites for leukemia, and so we had cadres that were dedicated to helping the community with health services. And Assata, that was her role in the party before the split that occurred in 1971, before the split in the Black Panther Party, and of course that was before the Black Liberation Army was formally, or should I say, organizationally disconnected from the above ground apparatus of the Black Panther Party.
Before you go, because before you go further, you mentioned the 1971 split, and I know there's a lot of folks that's listening that's not familiar with it, because you have folks who, some people say they came in the party at different times, right? Some people say they were around after the 66, between 66 and 71, and there's folks who came later, so on and so forth. You just mentioned the split, so if you don't mind, what was this split? What was the reason for the split? And then we can kind of get into the whole disconnection between the underground and above ground. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to definitely touch on that, because there's folks that's that's unclear, I'm sure.
Well, I know that we don't have that much time, so I'll try to be brief. Let me go back earlier. In around 68, between 68 and 69, before Huey P. Newton came out of the Black Panther Party, the Black Panther Party Central Committee was predominantly staffed and run by Black Panthers from the West Coast. Occasionally, they would call upon chapters and branches of the Black Panther Party to provide cadre power, provide membership power to work with the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party on the West Coast. And the Black Panther Party on the West Coast was focused initially, and rightly so, after the arrest of Huey P. Newton. I believe Huey P. Newton was busted in 1967 when Dr. King, after Dr. King was assassinated, or before. I have to go back and look at the exact dates and stuff. And
right before. You're right.
Yeah. I'm gonna leave it to you guys in the media to keep the timeline, because a lot of things, a lot of times I don't remember the dates exactly. I just remember the events and what was happening. So so when Huey went to prison, when he was incarcerated for the killing of a pig in San Francisco, the Black Panther Party focused on building a campaign for his freedom, and the theme was, the catch slogan was, "Free Huey P. Newton or the sky's the limit." And those of us who were in the Black Panther Party from coast to coast, especially on the East Coast, we took that slogan seriously. We took the sky the limit seriously. So, of course, we prepared to exact the consequence on what we call the pig power structure, same power structure you're dealing with today. The law enforcement establishment, who have a monopoly on sanctioned and legal violence, the right wing that has a monopoly on extra legal violence. We prepared ourselves to deal with them on the field of conflict in the urban areas, in the rural areas. And so we began to build that type of capacity. We began to arm ourselves, or we felt we would harm ourselves. And the Black Panther Party believed in organized self-defense of the Black community. We believed that that Black people had a right to defend themselves from racist attack and from attacks by the state. And there was no questions about that. But we felt strongly that if our leader, Huey P. Newton, who was the Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party, was executed by the state, then the state we would turn the lights off in New York and Chicago and around the country. And we meant that. That's how we rolled. And so there was a apparatus in the Black Panther Party that we called the BLA, the Black Liberation Army. And if you notice, if you read the Black Panther Party 10-point program, it says that no member of the Black Panther Party would be a soldier in or enlisted in the United States military. The only army that Black Panthers could join, that they could be a part of, was the Black Liberation Army. And that was a clandestine formation. We didn't, that aspect, that security aspect of the Black Panther Party was not in the offices of the Black Panther Party, although we contributed to the defense of our offices. Most offices of the Black Panther Party were fortified because the police had attacked on several occasions our party offices and shot them up and arrested Panthers. And so we always fortified our main offices. Our Panther pads, Panthers were collective. We believed in socialism, and we believed in sharing our struggle as a family, as an extended family, so to speak. And so we had what we call Panther pads, or apartments and buildings in which the Panthers who were active, who were members, who got out into the field and did the work in the clinics and the free breakfast programs. This is where we live. This is how we live. We lived together. We fought together, and in many cases, we were captured and died together. So there was this campaign to to build support on the left and in the progressive movements for the freedom of our leader, Huey P. Newton. And so as the trials progressed on Huey's behalf, the federal government had a concerted effort called a counterintelligence program to disrupt this campaign, to alienate the Black Panther Party from other left progressive movements by labeling us as anti-Semitic, by labeling us as anti-white, by labeling us as anti-law enforcement, anti-police, and all of these things. So they had an active propaganda and campaign. And in this campaign, they had several categories. One of the categories that they had was to list the leaders of the Black Panther Party in every area, in every city in America where there was a Black Panther chapter. And the leadership was highlighted, was targeted for neutralization, demonization, or otherwise incarceration. And they had what was called an agitated index, which included everyone from Dr. Martin Luther King to myself was on the agitated index. They had the Black Nationalist photo album, which they had pictures of every Black Panther Party leader from the local to the national level that was circulated to law enforcement for surveillance purposes and for harassment purposes and for targeting. They also had a Black Nationalist index that was used to identify Black leaders, and they gave these types of information to local prosecutors in order to go after Panthers in every city. Now, having said that, this was a program we assumed that the enemy was carrying out, but we didn't know it. We didn't know exactly how it was formulated. And what they did is they used different techniques. They planted stories in the mainstream newspaper, much like they're doing today, about the protesters around Palestine and defining them as anti-Semitic or violent, when in fact that's not the case. They would plant stories about Black Panthers who were supposedly stealing money from the Black community or intimidating and blackmailing retailers and stores. They went into the churches and they tried to enlist the pork chop preachers and progressive clergy to not allow the Black Panther Party into their churches, not to allow us to set up breakfast programs or health clinics in their churches. They told them that if they did so, you understand, they would be targeted for income tax and different types of crimes by the federal government. So this was this broad concerted effort to demonize and isolate the Black Panther Party and to undermine the Free Huey campaign, the Free Huey P. Newton, and the Panther political prisoners Panthers who were getting arrested almost daily and thrown into prison. And we had to get lawyers for them. We had to build support for them. We had to help their families. And this became an extreme burden on the Panther Party. And the major source of income for the Black Panther Party, of course, was the Black Panther Party newspaper. And New York, Chicago, and Boston were one of the major sources of income from the Black Panther Party community news service. We had the biggest circulation in New York and Chicago, Philly, and Boston on the East Coast. And so this revenue flowed, of course, to the Central Committee. And it was the Central Committee's distribution center in California, and a portion of it was kept in the local chapters to finance our operations. Well, the federal government, FBI, CIA, and all of them, they targeted these activities. They sought to disrupt the distribution of the Black Panther Party newspaper. They would misdirect our shipments. They would send them to Canada somewhere so the paper wouldn't come out on time. Sometimes they would just hijack the shipment entirely and destroy it, you see. And then, of course, the central office would say, you know, we sent you 5,000 newspapers, so you owe so much money for these newspapers, you know, because otherwise we can't print the next edition. Well, of course, if we didn't have the newspapers, or if they didn't come on time, there was no way we would have this money, you see, to send. So this became areas of contention a lot of times between national headquarters and the various chapters. But we handled it. We struggled with it. But the government used those types of contradictions. They would send letters to the leadership on the West Coast saying that those of us on the East Coast didn't respect them, or we didn't follow their instructions, or that we did this or we did that. And then they would send letters in reverse to the East Coast saying the Central Committee is going to do this and going to do that. This was their job. This is what they were doing. This is what they always do. This is what they're doing today as we speak. And so this began to have an impact. There were informers, of course, in the various branches and in chapters of the Black Panther Party. Some of these informers were state informers. They were undercover agents of, say, the local police forces, local law enforcement, and some of them were federal informants. We know about Fred Hampton and the informant that got him killed, that gave the police a layout to the Chicago Panther Pad, and gave it to the police, who then went on to assassinate and murder Fred Hampton. What a lot of people don't understand is that the assassination of Fred Hampton and the incarceration of the Panther 21 and all of those events were related. And they were related. They were related in the sense that as the Black Panther Party grew, there became increasing pressure on the Central Committee of the Black Panther Party to become more representative of the chapters, because many of the activists in the different cities that became Black Panthers, these activists were active in their cities even before the party had a chapter there. So they had a relationship in the community as Black activists. Some of them were Black nationalists. Some of them were Black cultural figures in the Black community and Black power advocates. In New York, for instance, when the chapter was first formed, the majority of the cadre that first joined the Black Panther Party was from SNCC. They were, because SNCC was undergoing a similar FBI COINTELPRO attack, and they had split along lines between Kwame Ture and Imam Jamil Al-Amin, which is Rat Brown, who were considered the more militant and radical. And then you had the bootlickers, like this bald head nigga that used to be, that died recently, Lewis.
John Lewis.
Yeah,
John Lewis.
Yeah, that bald head. Anyway.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah, man. And, you know, I'm going to try to restrict myself because, you know, I can get a bit profane.
Not you, brother.
So anyway,
couldn't imagine that.
So anyway, there was a similar a division that was occurring in SNCC, because that was after SNCC declared on the march. I think it was on the march to Selma, that a segment of the SNCC started talking about chanting Black Power. And the minute that they started talking about Black Power, the ears of the federal government saw an opportunity to divide SNCC from the more integrationist and reformist elements who enjoyed white support, who enjoyed white clergy support, and divide them along racial lines. That the Black Power advocates were talking about a Black nationalism that excluded white people, that excluded white support. And this affected, of course, that segment of the movement, which we call the Civil Rights Movement, because much of the organization that Dr. King enjoyed when he went to different venues in the South, those grassroots organizations were usually activists from SNCC and from the Congress of Racial Equality. They were students. They were the ones that organized the groundwork, and King came in and did the press conferences and brought the media and gave the speeches and helped mobilize the church, the clergies, the activist clergy, like in the SCLC. So they sought to divide that. Well, on the Black Liberation Front, on the side of those of us who had evolved from Malcolm X, who have taken up the call that Malcolm X made before he was assassinated by the CIA, with the collaboration and the instrument of the Messianic movement of the NOI. They attempted to divide us as well. And so in different areas and in different chapters, the leadership of the chapters and the branches was indigenous. It was part of the communities of those areas. The Philadelphia chapter of the Black Panther Party, the members were from Philadelphia. You know, in New York, the members were from Harlem, from South Jamaica, you know, from Queens, from both of us knew each other from when we was gangbanging, long before back in the 50s, you know. And Lumumba Shakur, for instance, and Sekou Odinga, you know, they were members of the South Jamaican bishops. Me, I was from the South Bronx, and I was the vice president of the Disciple Sportsmen. You know,
I remember you and Sundiata. I mean, not Sundiata. You and Sekou talking about that. Y'all's having a return to back in the day. Talking about whose gang was the toughest.
This is true, you know, and so, but anyway, so
I want to point out something real quick, right? Because you mentioned John Lewis and Stokely. I'm not going to cut you off, but I want to remind folks that at John Lewis's funeral, Bill Clinton gave a eulogy, and he said that, and I say there were 2 or 3 years where the movement went a little too far towards Stokely, but in the end, John Lewis prevailed. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, so that kind of shows you. But you can go ahead and get down. I just, while that was on my mind,
he brought the black activists back to the plantation. But right. So what was happening though during the Free Huey campaign, I kind of like digressed. I just wanted to set a larger picture of how the counterintelligence program was working at that time on a number of organizations in a number of areas. And so when right before, when the Black Panther Party members were captured and arrested on April 2nd, 1969, it started a wave, a series of events. It led to a series of events that culminated in the assassination of Fred Hampton, that culminated in the arrest of Bobby Seale in New Haven for murder, and his subsequent trial and the conspiracy trial of the Democratic Convention in a so-called Chicago 7 case. And it culminated in a contradiction between the chapters of the Black Panther Party, who felt that the Central Committee was not in touch with the chapters, that it was just taking advantage of and exploiting the chapters for finances, for resources, in order to deal with those cases and those individuals that Central Committee thought were important. And that's not to say that the Black Panther Party in New York had a problem with the Free Huey campaign and contributing money and raising money for Huey. But once the Panther 21 was arrested, the Panther 21 became a cause célèbre on the East Coast. And white Jewish liberals, from Leonard Bernstein to the Communist Party USA to the Progressive Labor Party, all of these different organizations flocked to the support of the Black Panther Party, and the Black Panther Party 21 Defense Committee became somewhat of a cash cow. It had a lot of money. It got a lot of money in support of the Panthers. We got a lot of publicity in support of the Panther Party. And so the West Coast thought that, that they should have more of a control over this resource, but they couldn't completely control it, because what happened when the Panther 21 got busted, immediately after that, in fact, within 2 weeks, Bobby Seale was targeted by the New Haven police for the murder of Alex Rackley. This is a story I can get into at some other time, but basically Alex Rackley was a young brother who was semi-autistic, who lived next to the Black Panther Party office in Harlem. And he loved the Panther Party. He used to come into the office and do handiwork. He would sweep up, he'd keep the office clean. And, and we loved him too. He was a cool brother. He was just, artistically challenged. And so when the Panther 21 was busted or was captured in April 1969, it sent shockwaves through the party, because this was actually the security section of the Black Panther Party in New York. It was like a gut shot to the Black Panther Party because of the leadership and what we represented. And it was the Harlem chapter that was the major focus of this. And Alex Rackley, of course, when he saw that myself and Setaweo and other brothers that he loved, and that we used to have him come in with PE classes and help him read and everything, when we got busted, he really felt emotionally. He went off. And he talked a lot about how, we were probably set up by this. He was just talking because he was emotionally disturbed and upset.
Right.
But when I was in prison, sadly, David Hilliard and Bobby Seale were scheduled to speak at Yale University. I think I was in prison on the Panther 21, I was in the Tombs in Lower Manhattan. And we were all separated when we were first captured. Some of us were in the Tombs, some of us were on Rikers Island, some of us was in Queens House of Detention, and others was in Brooklyn House of D. We were all separated at first. So our lawyers had to go through all of these legal maneuvers to try to get us all together so that they could defend us for a trial. And it was during this period that David Hilliard and Bobby Seale came through New York, and the lawyers, my lawyer, Gerald Lefcourt and Bill Kunstler, arranged for David Hilliard to come in and see me on a legal visit. And David told me that they were going to close the Harlem chapter of the Black Panther Party, and because it was riddled with informers. That New York was going to be shut down because it was riddled with informers, but specifically Harlem. And I pleaded with David that to do so would be a tragedy, would be a tactical and strategic mistake, because Harlem was the center of Black nationalism, was the center of Black culture. This is where Marcus Garvey organized. This is where Malcolm X spoke on the corners of 125th Street and 7th Avenue. This is where, this is where, the idea and the notion of Black self-determination, of cultural renaissance, was Harlem. And
Carlos Cooks, folks like that. Yeah.
Carlos Cook, Alumbe Brath. And I said, you can't close this office, David. It would be a strategic defeat, So he told me that, okay, he'd think about it. And he went to New Haven for the speaking engagement with Bobby. Now, at that time, there was an undercover agent. I forgot his name.
George Sams. Crazy George Sams.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying? This is your purpose, man. Y'all got to come up with these.
Man, stop putting me in a journalist, Troy. I learned from you.
Yeah. George Sams, this piece of shit.
Right.
George Sams was an undercover agent, and he had, ironically, he was He was the first cadre at a Central Committee. In other words, he went to different trouble spots in the Black Panther Party to straighten stuff out. You know,
he's like the police for real, the cop they send every
but
every
you know he was sent by David Hilliard and the Central Committee. Of course, they didn't know he was an undercover agent. Well, I guess they didn't. I have second doubts on that. But anyway, he was sent, and so he was in New York, supposedly trying to rid the party there of any undercover agents or agent provocateurs. Okay, and so when David came through and told me he was going to close the Panther office in Harlem, and I begged him not to, George Sams had already been in Harlem, had heard Alex Rackley talking about informers and how we were set up, and how how Dhoruba and Setawayo was set up, and the agents were still here. So George Sams had him taken to New Haven. Now the New Haven chapter was small at that time, so when Bobby came to speak there, I think he spoke at Yale University or something. He was supposed to speak there. George Sams had transported Alex Rackley to the Panther office there and had taken him down to the basement and was torturing him. He's talking about he was an informant, and he told Bobby Seale that I have the informant on the Panther 21. He's downstairs in the basement and he's giving up all this information. So Bobby Seale, who was the co-founder of the Black Panther Party and the chairman of the Black Panther Party, went down to the basement and saw Alex Rackley in, I imagine, a very physically abused state, and he didn't want to have anything to do with this. So Bobby told George Sams, you handle this, and he left, right? And George Sams had Alex murdered, had his body thrown into a river, and of course, being an informant, the police recovered the body and said that Bobby Seale is the one that ordered the murder of Alex Rackley, and there was a warrant out for Bobby Seale, and Bobby had to report to New Haven, and he was incarcerated in New Haven for the murder of Alex Rackley. So now the Black Panther Party Central Committee had a dilemma. We still had the Free Huey campaign, and the co-founder of the Black Panther Party, Chairman Bobby Seale, was now being railroaded in New Haven on the East Coast for the murder of Alex Rackley. So closing the Harlem office and the cash cow that the Panther 21 represented would be a fool's errand. Because we had to build up support in New Haven. Most of the New Haven chapter or cadre came from New York in the beginning when Bobby was first arrested. We had to build a similar campaign for Bobby Seale on the East Coast, and so most of our energies on the East Coast went to defending the chairman of the Black Panther Party against these murder charges. Just George Sams moved on to other places. He moved on to Philadelphia. He moved on to Chicago and did similar dirt before he was exposed. But the net result was that the West Coast of the Black Panther Party Central Committee sent two security members, two members of the Central Committee, first cadre, Thomas Jolly and Robert Bay, who were Huey's who was the personal security of David and the Central Committee, sent them to New York to run the New York chapter. And unfortunately, these two knuckleheads were not up to the task. They didn't understand New York. They didn't understand Black folks in New York, and they didn't know that we would put our foot in their ass if they stepped out of line in New York. New York wasn't L.A. New York wasn't San Francisco. New York was, we was different. And they thought because everybody had an African name that we were on the same level as us and Ron Karanga and the United Slaves who had hunted and killed panthers on the West Coast. They thought we were pork chop nationalists. We were far from pork chop nationalists. We were armed, dedicated revolutionary nationalists. And so these knuckleheads came to New York in order to run the party, and they ran it into the ground. And
so do you think that was done on purpose? I mean, or do you think, because I know that
I think it was just done out of ignorance, because they were just not administratively and qualified to deal with organizing in New York. They didn't know the territory. They misconstrued stuff. They had their own personal issues, which I won't go into. But they had their own personal issues which influenced the things that they did. And of course, being from New York, and some of us that were out, like Setawayo and myself, they ran, we bumped heads, and so they would get back to the West Coast and say, well, Dhoruba is doing this and we don't want them to do that. And the Central Committee is doing this. So I used to have to fly out to the West Coast damn near every day. Every weekend when the Panther 21 trial recess, make a tape for Huey, send the tape into Huey, and Huey would come back and give it to David, and David would tell me, give me my marching orders for the week. And that's how things were going for a while. But we began to prevail in the Huey campaign. We began to prevail in terms of bringing the issue of a more national Central Committee to the attention of Huey and the attention of Bobby.
And we talked about real quick, because you just mentioned something, you be talking in passing, what I'm saying, like it's, just flying through stuff, right? So I remember being in the Bay with you, and you took me around and showed me different places, whatever, so on and so forth, right? And one of the things you talked about was what you said a few minutes ago about they would fly you out there every week. What was the purpose of them flying you from New York to Oakland every weekend? You know what I'm saying? That seems like, just for you to make a tape, you could have made a tape in New York and sent it in.
I was, like I said, I was field secretary.
Right.
It was a debriefing.
Okay.
I was sent, if they had a problem with paper circulation, they would run it past me, get my version of what was happening. If they had a problem with Thomas Jolly and Robert Bass saying one thing and I said another, they would bring me out there and have me explain what I was doing, why I was doing it, why I was saying it, and have that taken into Huey for Huey to make a decision on how I should move or how we should move. And of course, Huey was the commander in chief of the Black Panther Party, and he was my leader. And so, yeah, but increasingly this became a thorn in the side of the Central Committee, because many times I would advocate for different things that reflected our reality on the East Coast. Especially, I had to deal also with the Panther 21 members who were still in prison,
right,
and who were increasingly getting visits from former Panthers who were purged by the two people that they sent out there, who were kicked out of the party. They were getting visits from these folks, and some of these people were informers. Some of these people were agent provocateurs. So, Curtis Powell is getting visits. Lumumba Shakur is getting visits from these people, and they tell him, the Panthers in Harlem went to hell, and they all down with Huey, and they stealing all the money for the Panther 21 and all of this stuff. And so I'm on trial with these brothers. And so while I'm in the courtroom with them, they looking at me sideways, and I'm trying to explain to them, this ain't what's happening, man. Y'all just got to chill and let us try to handle this, you see? And of course, the counterintelligence program knows these things. So they'll send letters to the West Coast saying, Dhoruba, he's hating on David, or he wants to usurp Huey, and vice versa, you see, and so the people started looking sideways at each other, and this was at a crucial time when we had just about won the struggle of organization. You know, the Black Panther Party, what people don't understand is the difference between the Black Panther Party and most organizations at that time, whether it was SNCC, whether it was us, whether it was the NW, whatever, that we were a cadre organization. We had a command and control structure that functioned on the basic principle of democratic centralism, which meant that there was democracy in the rank and file that influenced the command and control structure, so that the rank and file could have a voice in how things went, how it was organized. We got most of that from the liberation movements in Guinea-Bissau and other liberation armed struggle movements. It was democratic centralism, that the soldiers got to talk about the tactics and the conditions that they were up against to the leadership, and the leadership had to adjust their strategies, their mass line and their party line to these realities, so that the soldiers can carry out the mandates of the party. And so that was the difference. The Black Panther Party was a cadre organization. It was a militarized, organized cadre. And so we began to prevail that maybe the Central Committee should avail itself of leaders in the various localities and have them out on the West Coast to advise and to contribute to the national strategic strategy of the Black Panther Party. And it was at that point that the enemy realized the danger in this, and they made certain moves. And one of the moves that they made, because the people that were being chosen for this role were being called First Cadre, Central Committee First Cadre. The people that were being chosen for this role were the different leaders in the other cities who had been activists, who were in leadership, and that they would then become the advisors of the Central Committee on a daily basis. So as First Cadre concept was being built, the FBI figured that they had to do something about this. And one of the things that they did is that they used the Panther 21 in prisons, alienation from what was happening outside, to denounce Huey P. Newton once he got out of prison, to denounce him as no longer the real leadership of the revolutionary Black movement, that in fact that this leadership had moved to the white left, to the SDS and to white leftist other organizations. And this is something that I begged them not to do. I begged them not to do any of this. And but of course, they didn't listen to me. They thought I was, just speaking from a position because I wasn't in prison. And Fred Hampton was one of those leaders that was scheduled, or that was supposed to be in the First Cadre of the Central Committee. There were other leaders like myself, and there was other leaders in Baltimore and other places that would have been assigned permanently to the Central Committee as a liaison, as advisories, as First Cadre. The pigs didn't want that. They didn't want the Central Committee to become more efficient, more democratic. And so they moved to make sure that didn't happen. And one of the ways they moved was to assassinate Fred Hampton on December 4th. 1969. The other ones that they moved was to have encourage the Panther 21, Lumumba Shakur, and them to write a statement that Huey P. Newton was no longer a leader of the radical Black movement, that he was a sellout, and all of these things. And this was at the same time that, by the way, that Huey had moved into a penthouse. And he was hanging out with Elaine Brown and them niggas, and they had opened up a nightclub, and they were slinging yayo on the streets of San Francisco, and and all of these things. And Huey was erratic in his behavior because he was probably imbibing some of the same yayo that they were slinging. And so
you're saying Huey, Elaine, and these folks was Is that what you're saying? Because
I'm saying that they were the ones that I mean, you know, they were the ones that became increasingly threatened by the chapters of the Black Panther Party that was still on. We were still on the revolutionary armed resistance tip. We hadn't moved to the right. We weren't trying to run for public office and get elected coon catcher. You know, we wasn't on that. You know, we believed that Huey had to be free or the sky was the limit. And once Huey was free, you know, we had to deal with Bobby. And we believed that that if the pigs harassed and murdered us, then we would respond in kind. You know, there would always be a political consequence for the aggression and violence of the state, and it would come from us. And that's how we rolled. That's how we were organized. That's how we were educated for years before he.
So how did they get off? How did they get off the path then? I mean, because you saying
that they wanted to control more of the bourgeois politics of the Bay Area. They wanted to become more acceptable to the political machinery, and plus the Black Panther Party had this enormous reputation in California and the Bay Area as being a stalwart defender of the Black community. They had a pristine reputation and rightly deserved. You know, this is how Huey started the Black Panther Party. He stepped inside history and changed the paradigm of politics, if not in America, definitely in the Bay Area. So the Black Panther Party enjoyed popular support, and they started feeling, you know, that, you know, we could translate this into a third political party. We could run for mayor. We could run for city council. We could take over, you know, and that meant taking over everything. That meant taking over the bootlicking task, you know, a purpose, taking over the street trade, the drug trade, taking over everything. So they started moving on this gangster shit, and they started moving to the right. And of course, this came all to a head when Eldridge Cleaver and Huey P. Newton had this beef on national television, and Huey threatened Eldridge, and Eldridge threatened Huey, and the FBI said, "Yes, we got him now," right? And so Huey was scheduled to come to the East Coast to speak at Yale University. And FBI bombarded him with information by informants, by letters, through newspaper articles, that if he came to the East Coast, his life was in danger. That those brothers and sisters on the East Coast, specifically myself and others, were going to harm him. And this was never the case, never. But of course, Huey and being influenced by the Elaine Browns and these knuckleheads on the East Coast, West Coast, you know, believed it. Because, you know, we always stood fast on our core belief, you know, of what the Black Panther Party stood for, its 10-point program and platform, and that we stood fast on this. So we weren't running candidates for a political office. We weren't doing all of that. We were mobilizing people in the streets. We were dealing with the drug dealers in the streets straight up. We was dealing with them straight up as they knew how. We was knocking them off. We was taking their product, we was dumping it, and we was taking their money. And so, you know, we weren't on that, you know, vote for me and I'll set you free shit. So so when Huey P. Newton came, and by the way, whenever Central Committee members, especially Kathleen Cleaver or Huey and them, came to New York, I was one of the individuals that was, you know, charged with their security. We would meet them at the airport, charged with the transportation, how they would move and everything. Well, of course, if you believe that the people that's going to secure your safety are people that want to kill you, you understand? You quite naturally, you super paranoid. I know I would be. You see, and so when
get in the car with me.
Yeah. So when Huey came to New York, to go to speak at Yale. This was at the height of the Panther 21 trial. And when he came to New York, we escorted him to New Haven, and he got super paranoid. He called some Panthers from the West Coast who were in Boston, who was in Chicago, who I knew that, they did wet work. It was about the hard stuff, you see. And he called them in to take over security. He didn't trust us. And it was at that time that the Panther 21 statement about Huey not being a revolutionary, et cetera, was circulated on the left in the leftist newspapers. And Huey suspended the Panther 21. And
this is in the middle of the trial?
Yeah. He suspended the Panther 21. And just a couple of weeks before, he had suspended and purged Geronimo Pratt, who had gotten arrested in Texas while underground. And they labeled Geronimo G, enemy of the people. And everybody knows the rest of that is history, what happened with G and how he was framed and spent all that time in prison. He also, Huey at that time, under the influence of the Elaine Browns and them knuckleheads on the East Coast, had conned George Jackson into believing that everybody that wasn't from the West Coast was somehow a threat to the Black Panther Party. He had Huey and Elaine and them had jacked the money from George's book. They stole the money. They put it in their own accounts, and George's mother, there's a whole story about that I won't even get into. So all of this was happening at the same time. This is my point.
You saying they jacked the money from Huey's?
George, because his mother, George signed the money. You have to talk to Georgia Jackson. May Allah be pleased with her. She, someone who knows the story almost completely about how this was done, was close friends with George's mama, was Mae Jackson. And Mae Jackson was in SNCC at the time and all of this stuff. But that's a whole nother story that I don't want to get into. But George, initially, when the split jumped off, he was rolling with Huey and them until he found out about some of the gangster stuff that was going on in the community, how BGF members were coming out and being used as enforcers, for the party on the West Coast, and how Huey done got crazy paranoid about because he was on drugs and all this crazy stuff. But more to the point was because we're talking about the split. I didn't mean to go off on all of this.
No, it's all good, because you already know, you and I get together. We talk about cookies. Next thing you know, we talk about.
Yeah, so I just wanted to get back. I took this roundabout way to get back to Assata and Sundiata and how that came about. So what happened was when Huey came back to the East Coast to speak at Yale, we had understood that there were threats against those Panther 21 members who were out of prison. That the West Coast believed that we meant them harm, and so they had put out a contract. When I say contract, I don't mean that they won't pay people, but they put out I guess you would call it a hit on all of us who were in the Panther 21 who were out of prison because of what the Panther 21 in prison did, in which we tried to get them not to do. And so we were forced in the middle of trial to go underground. That was all of us. We were prepared to do that. We had made preparations to do that because none of us were about to go back to prison if we got convicted.
Right.
So we had made the necessary preparations. All of us did. Afeni Shakur was down with the preparations, Jamal, myself, all of us who were out of prison. But when it came time for us to make this move, because of what happened with Huey and what happened with the Panther 21, it was when he came back to the East Coast and he changed security And we saw that the very members that he had brought in to secure security were the same ones that would be used to, to neutralize us. We realized that we couldn't continue to be in a position of going to court every day and being exposed like that. And so we all decided that we were going to go underground. But all of us didn't. Fanny chose not to. She didn't want to. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to do that.
Shout out to Fanny. The anniversary of her death was yesterday as well. Ironically, the same day as the Jersey Turnpike shootout. So I wanted to point that out since we since you mentioned her. But go ahead. You said she didn't want to go underground.
No, she didn't want to go underground. Karma's a bitch, man. So yeah. So she didn't want to go. So when we didn't appear back in court, of course, they put her back in prison. Right? They put her and Joan Berry back in prison for a few days. Right? And so, sadly, we went underground, and the details of that I'll go into in my book. But suffice it to say that it was my job to help organize the East Coast cadre that had been recruited as the BLA, that had been established as the BLA. We had safe houses, we had different facilities, and we had community support for us. There's a lot of community support for the BLA that people don't really understand. And these were ordinary working people. Some people were on welfare. Some people were working people. We had support from doctors and teachers and everything. So when we didn't show up in court, it was this network that we fell back on, right, that we went into. And it was this network that Assata was a part of. Like I said, she was medical cadre at first. And so her job, of course, was to secure our access to updated medical care. In other words, if one of our comrades were wounded or hurt in action, we were able to take care of this comrade without having to go to the hospital and report it. So we had underground medical care facilities, and if our facilities couldn't handle it, if it was more than a flesh wound and we couldn't handle it, then we were able to utilize the facilities in Lincoln Hospital or Harlem Hospital on the down low without anybody really knowing it, but those doctors who supported our movement and our cause, who believed in Black liberation. People did what they could do where they were at. And this is a lesson that we should understand now. Everybody got a role to play. And we got professionals in our community that could support our struggle. And they have to be organized. They have to be politically educated and motivated. And so it's with that idea that we could take what we have in order to do what we need to do or get what we want. So that was the beginning of the first cadres of the BLA. And when we went underground at that point in 1971, in May, June of 1971. And Assata was part of that move. Well, what happened was the New York City Police Department, in their training brochure, they had at that time what they called the first BLA and the second BLA wars, urban guerrilla resistance, and so they taught this to their police, to their police recruits, and so the first cadres, like I said, that were in the BLA came primarily from San Francisco, New York, Philly, Baltimore and Boston, and Washington. So we had safe houses. We moved in that way. Our primary source of income was expropriation of from drug dealers. Were expropriations from financial institutions, and so that's what
one of my favorite words is expropriations. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, we had to expropriate capital in order to make it work for the benefit of the people, for to finance our operations, and so at the same time that we did this, the government moved away from the counterintelligence program to a program of urban guerrilla suppression and repression, and that's when they came up with so-called investigations like New Kill, which stood for the new killing of police officers, and that was formed by Nixon and Haldeman and the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover. They met after two New York police were ambushed and in front of Hogan's premises, and two others were killed. And they were they met in Nixon's White House, and they said, well, we have the beginnings of an underground urban guerrilla movement in the United States, and we got to try to nip it in the bud. And the primary suspects in this movement that we have to nip in the bud are former Panthers, members that were part of the split in the Black Panther Party, who weren't running for political office. So we were considered targets of New Kill, even though there was no evidence that we had anything to do with any of these things.
Right.
And so they started New Kill. Then they started. They got a whole. They believed that Assata Shakur, because we had females in the BLA, and they had the same role as men. They took the same risk, and they performed somewhat different functions because of the agenda. But at the same time, they suffered the same targeting, and the police had no compassion or no compunction against killing them than they had against killing me, a male. It wasn't like that. And so Assata was in the first cadre of the BLA from its beginning in June 1971, and most of her cadre that came from New York and the Washington Heights area. And most of them, some of them were killed in Florida, and some were captured in Atlanta. Then they escaped from Atlanta, and so they were decimated in a way. And so another level, some new cadres that had been trained, that had dropped out of the party and went underground, they began to take up slack, and that's how Zayd and Sundiata, because Sundiata was in prison when all of this happened. He didn't get out until after the 21 was acquitted, which was in May of 1971. That's when him and Lumumba got out of prison. So initially, they weren't BLA cadre. They were they were Panthers who were purged from the party while in prison, and they came out. And so some of our comrades who still tried to hold together the different sections, of course, they became involved with them. And to make a long story short, that's how Sundiata and Zayd, who was the former Minister of Information, wound up in a vehicle on the turnpike with Assata, who was propagandized by the state as the queen mother or the mother hen of the Black Liberation Army. That's how they wound up with her at that point, in making them transit, move on the turnpike, and the rest, of course, we know about as what happened 51 years ago yesterday. They were stopped, and Assata was captured. Zayd was murdered, and Sundiata was captured.
So that was a target, you think? I mean, I know you talked about Chess Rob before, and Assata's whole piece. They were stopped under the for an alleged broken tail light or faulty tail light or whatever they said. What's your thoughts on that whole stop? Do you think that was by design, or it was just
we have to understand the conditions at the time. The New Jersey
Right.
Turnpike was notorious for stopping black folks driving while black. It was notorious, and this was the height of militancy and urban guerrilla activity. So all black folks, any 2 or 3 in the car, was always suspicious. First of all, second of all, Assata's picture was in every post office, every police station, and even in the police cars and the police vehicles. She was a prime target of the police, and this was not just on the East Coast. This was nationwide. Okay, so
she was who they pretended Angela was. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, I mean, she's what Angela, intellectually might have wanted to be. But Assata was the real deal, and by this time, she had been ripping and running for over a year. You see what I'm saying? With the underground, she was helping to train new cadre. She was a liaison with those brothers and sisters who tried to keep the Panther Party alive in New York under the auspices of Right On Publications, and was still working out of the offices, and the young brothers and sisters that came after us, and that included Sophia Bukhari and all of them, Sophia Bukhari and Asante Alston and these brothers and sisters who became part of the BLA. They were in a different iteration of the BLA as it continued to struggle and fight. We still got new soldiers. We still had old soldiers who escaped from prison and then trained and started different sections, like Himu White and Twyman Myers, and some of these brothers were never even in the Black Panther Party. You see what I'm saying? And
that's important that you mentioned in that, because, and not to cut you, but I remember when we had you and we say rising power to our brother Blood McCreary and Sekou. That's one of the things that Blood stressed as well, because folks are under the assumption that if you were a part of the BLA, that you was in the Black Panther Party. And, I definitely, if you don't mind, just touching that for a second, because I think that, again, there's this, revisionist history, and then you have different folks who are rewriting things and saying, okay, this means that means this, and it wasn't the case. So
that's true, because folks have to really understand that the BLA wasn't just this entity that sprung out of the Black Panther Party's cadre, rank and file cadre. The Black Panther Party was a part of the Black community. We sold newspapers in the Black community. We used to take family and members to prisons to visit their children in the Black community. We were in the churches in the Black community. We would sit out and play checkers in the park with the homeless, and we was in the after hour spots and the pool halls with the gangsters. So we were an integral part of the Black community, and as that, our persona, our ideology, we always politically educated those who we were around. And we always understood that everybody, if we understood everyone's limitations, then we would never have expectations of them that they couldn't fulfill. So therefore, we would hardly be disappointed. And so what happened, the same people that we sold newspapers with, and we would come up and down the streets with in the summertime, and we would hang out in the park with or go to the pool with. These were the same people that when we went underground took us in. You know, they would help hide us. They would transport us. They would support us. If they didn't have no money, you understand, we could crash at their apartment and they'll go see their aunt or their grandmother for the weekend. You see, we had producers who had studios, little storefront studios in the community, you know, and they would give them to us. So, you know, we had comrades like Curtis Mullins, who was an entrepreneur, who had 2 or 3 grocery stores and stuff. And in the back of his store, you know, it was a BLA information center. You see what I'm saying? You move the pants presser and go through the back door, and there was a BLA center. And so people have to
too. Yeah,
people
cool
have to understand that the enemy, the repressors, the state, always try to portray the integral relationship between the freedom fighters and their community as the freedom fighters using ordinary people for human shields as a diversion. No, we were part of the community. The BLA was part of the community. When we went to prison, we educated the prisoners that we were in. That's why they always tried to isolate us in prison. So if a brother was making parole, you know, after he spent a year with me, he went out and I would send a message out, you know, so-and-so was cool. And he wound up in the BLA. That's what he wanted to do since he got out of prison. Payback's a motherfucker, you see? And so, you know, those who don't understand this, they can go back on YouTube and look at something like the Battle of Algiers to understand how the so-called criminal element, the so-called street dudes on the streets who would rather punch a cracker in the face than punch his time clock. You see, they were the primary source for the arms front of the Black Liberation Army. These were the soldiers. They just didn't have politics at that time. It was just hustling and hanging out on the streets trying to make a living. But once they got politics, once they understood how the system had marginalized them, how the system has treated them and their family, they wanted to get back. This was not only a subjective matter. This was an existential. This was an existential reality of Black urban oppression and exploitation. The Black Liberation Army, just like Hamas, cannot be eradicated from the Black community because it lives inside the hearts and the spirits of the Black community and those in the Black community who would resist, who would fight that oppression, who would challenge the armed agents of the state on the streets in broad daylight or in the pitch of night. So it's a delusion to think that every member of the BLA that would later come after us all came from the Black Panther Party, because by then the Black Panther Party had moved so far to the right, you know, that they were talking about revolution pending pending freedom. What was
survival pending revolution?
Yes,
survival pending revolution.
Survival pending revolution, which has a logical ring to it. You got to survive in order to conduct a revolution, which is true. But they use that as camouflage for not resisting anymore against the armed agents of the state. That in fact that they were going to become they were going to become part of the new and evolving comprador class, the one that we have today, that only analyzes or deals with the system based on the realities and the definitions of the system. In other words, if we, as Orasani Burton pointed out in The Tip of the Spear, which I recommend your listeners read, he points out.
Shout out to Orasani. Yes.
Yeah, he points out that white supremacy is a delusion. It's a contradiction. It's a lie. But it has been invested with power and military might and religious zeal to the point where there's people who actually believe it and carry it out and try to enforce it. So for us to engage in history from the point of view of the white supremacists, from the point of view of the colonizers, then we are engaging in a delusion our goddamn self.
Right.
We have to engage in the struggle based on our assessment and our understanding of our own radical tradition, of our own history of resistance. Amilcar Cabral pointed out succinctly that African liberation against the Portuguese, against the colonial powers, was the Africans' return to their own historical continuum. A continuum that was interrupted by the colonization of Africa and Europeans who put us in their historical continuum as footnotes. So we have to understand that white supremacy is the basis for the European settler state that is the United States. And this is the reason why the United States will back the European settler state, Zionist state of Israel, back it to the hilt, because that's the last colonial white supremacist settler project on the planet. And it's it's meant to ensure the U.S. hegemony and political influence in the area of the Middle East, or what I call Western Asia. And the U.S. is invested in that. It's like Genocide Joe said when he was younger: if Israel didn't exist, we would have to invent it. You see,
I want to definitely get into that. I want to segue, but right before that, because we got a few minutes, I want you to say a little bit about Sundiata, because we touched on Zayd and we touched on Assata, and we definitely want to get into what's going on with these encampments and resistance, so on and so forth. But prior to it, I want to definitely, we just left Sundiata Kohli last week, as I mentioned. He's now 87 years old, did 49 years in prison. Give us a little background on Sundiata, because last week we was marching in the street, and for someone like me, I want to say, I usually don't give you too much credit because it don't go right all the time. But anyway, I want to say, man, it was an honor just before I knew either one of you all, just to be out there. I mean, just to see the posters, the free such and such, so on and so forth. And now we're marching through the streets of Philly. You understand what I'm saying? With you and Chairman Fred Jr. and so many others, Pam Africa, so many others. But to see this brother, who we couldn't imagine getting out at one point, 87, still marching. And then I'm not gonna tell people about about Raza Khan's van that you dropped out of. We ain't gonna talk about that. But give us a little play on who Sundiata was and is, and his importance to our movement, because folks talk about him, and he was, to our understanding, he wasn't just the regular rank and file. He came from a different class. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, Sundiata was he came from the highly technical class of Black experts that were key to the U.S. space program. Sundiata was highly educated, highly proficient in technology, and so he came to the Black Panther Party clearly, not because he came from the streets, not because like me, he just hated bullies, and the police were the biggest bullies that we knew. He came from the technological and political and elite, the Black professional class. And he chose to roll with the Black Panther Party because of his love of Malcolm X and what happened to Malcolm, and because he believed that he had the type of talent, the type of expertise that could contribute to the liberation of Black people. So he made a choice, much like Dr. Curtis Powell, who was a geneticist, who he was a doctor. He made a choice to join the Black Panther Party. This wasn't something that, I mean, you would expected that, Sundiata, coming from the class and the educational background that he had, and he was mature at that time. He wasn't no small boy in 1970 and 1968 and 69. He was a grown adult man who had studied in the best universities, who had perfected his craft, and was being used by the U.S. government to perfect its own space program. He made a choice, and this is very important to understand, because we have black professionals and Black experts in technology and communications who still haven't made a choice to put their talents and their use to the benefit of the liberation of their people. They're still indulged in the duopoly politics of delusional white supremacy and democratic fascism. And they believe in their own individual talents could take them to the top, and they can be recognized, and in recognition of them, then all Black folks are recognized, and then they could open up a foundation and give back to poor people in the Black community. That delusional bullshit, you see. But it's all based on individualism, and Sundiata, he didn't buy into that individual professional approach to empowerment of Black people. He felt that he could contribute to the party, to Black folks, by being on the front lines where the tire met the road. And you couldn't get more on the front lines in the 1960s and early 70s than with the Black Panther Party.
Right on, right on. Definitely shout out to Sundiata for his work, for his energy, for his effort. I know that the last time we had him on here was when we did the piece for Sekou, and may Sekou rise in power, you know what I mean? And also, Daquee, may she continue, her and the family, to, and the Daji and all these folks, Dadaji and everyone, continue to go through their healing process, right? We got about, let me see here, probably about 20 minutes, right? But I want to touch on what's going on in regards to the whole situation, not just in Palestine, but the resistance is going on, because we spoke a little bit about the whole professors and so on and so forth. You have these different colleges and universities that are playing a role in what's going on. You have different students and different organizers who are working to fight and to resist, peacefully, but they're not being, the peace is not returned. I want to play a clip. We know that some Republican senators held a press conference yesterday, a press briefing, to discuss pro-Palestinian protests on college campuses. So I want to play a little bit of what these fools had to say and get your thoughts on that. Here we are.
We're here to discuss the little Gazas that have risen up on campuses across America, and the liberal college administrators and politicians who refuse to restore law and order and to protect other students. These little Gazas are disgusting cesspools of anti-Semitic hate, full of pro-Hamas sympathizers, fanatics, and freaks. Here's just a sampling of what these lunatics were saying just days after Hamas's atrocity against Israel. A Cornell professor called the October 7th attack exhilarating. A Columbia professor called it awesome. A Yale professor called it an extraordinary day. More than 30 Harvard students signed a letter claiming that Israel was, quote, entirely responsible for the attack. A pro-Hamas student group at University of Virginia called Hamas terrorists
If your old AC system has struggled to keep up with the summer heat, it might be time for an upgrade. Get a brand new system for only $99.99 per month, installed the next day by the experts at Barty.
For comfort and care, Barty is there.
As you see,
I'm a therapist who goes to therapy. And
anyway, I guess they didn't want that to be seen. They went to a quick commercial. But anyway, you know, he went on to talk about you know, basically demonizing and criminalizing you know, these protesters. I wanted to know your thoughts on it. Like, what do you have? What's your position? What do we say to the protesters? What do we say to these members, these Republicans who are standing up saying that, you know, this is out of control and these people are idiots and they're, you know, all this other craziness? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I wouldn't even talk to them crackers. I mean, what is there to say? I told you they're delusional. White supremacy is a delusion. Okay, it's a historical delusion, and it's coming to its final penultimate end. These crackers that's sitting up there are invested in the war machine that is the United States. Israel gets billions of dollars a year to be the outpost and the major advocate for U.S. hegemony in Western Asia. And let me point out, the use of the term anti-Semitic is a misnomer, because to be a Semitic refers to the linguistic roots of a people's language. You know, Amharic, Arabic, these are all Semitic languages, okay? So if anybody's anti-Semitic, it's the Zionists, because the only Semitic people in Palestine are the Palestinians. So Zionism is an anti-Semitic proposition. Once we understand that the majority of Zionists are Europeans, they're Ashkenazi Jews who used to speak Yiddish, who adapted Judaism. Judaism as a religion has nothing to do with Zionism. Zionism is a white supremacist construct. It's a white settler construct, okay? And it depends on the elimination of the Palestinian people in order to manifest itself in the type of a white supremacist apartheid state that the Israelis want to create. We have to understand that if there was a true democratic organization of the state of Israel, you know, that the Palestinians in the final analysis would outnumber the European Israelis. So if you had a true democracy, it wouldn't even be a secular Jewish state. It would be a democratic state where everybody was equal. So that's not in the cards. That wasn't in the cards when Theodore Herzl petitioned the British government at the onset of World War I, and the British government rewarded him after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire with the Balfour Declaration, in which they said, okay, we can get the Jews out of Europe, put them in Palestine. And they knew at that moment that project had to be a settler project that depended and relied upon the extermination of the Palestinian people, of the Semitic people. Okay, we have to understand what anti-Semitism really means in terms of Europeans. Okay, because the only genuine Jews who are of Semitic root are the Sephardic Jews, and they come from North Africa, from Ethiopia, and from the region that is now Palestine. It used to be called the Levant. Okay, so Europeans are, you know, Netanyahu's name before he was Netanyahu was probably Shittlestein or some old shit like that, that piece of dog ass motherfucker. So don't start me on these crackers. Why would I respond to these idiots standing up there in suits? You're gonna have to censor that part. I know that, but it just enrages. It just enrages me that you would bait me into a response to these crackers, man, who are delusional. You see,
hey man,
and we have.
I need to hear from you.
But we have to really understand that the U.S. is invested economically as well as militarily in the European settler state of Israel. Almost people don't understand over 81% of all foreign military aid that the U.S. allocates to any country comes back to the U.S. and employs U.S. workers, keeps U.S. industries, technological industries, Raytheon, McDonnell Douglas. It keeps all of them in business. War is a profit of capitalism. That's the threat of war, and the use of war is that process. So the demonization of Palestinians, the demonization of Muslims is a direct consequence of the U.S. attempt to maintain its racist hegemony and control over a region in which it has no roots, in which it has no interest other than the exploitation of the resources there. And finally, I just want to say that while the genocide in Gaza is occurring, there's a bigger humanitarian crisis in the Sudan. And the Sudanese crisis has over 15 million people that's internal refugees, that has over 1.5 million people who are facing imminent starvation. And this war is carried out between two armed factions. And one of these armed factions is the former Janjaweed that were brought into the military by al-Bashir, the former president or premier or whatever you want to call that dog of Sudan. And the Janjaweed are financed by the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. You know, they're the ones that's providing arms and stuff that the U.S. gives them, because the UAE is also getting arms aid from the United States, and they're financing this war in the Sudan in order to establish some type of a pan-Arabic hegemony in alignment against Iran, against and in support of Israel, and in support of the Israeli military. Of course, the Arab leaders are having a problem with this because the streets of North Africa, the streets of Egypt, the streets of the UAE, the streets in Dubai are packed with millions and millions of Arabs who are rooting for and on the side of the Palestinians. Okay, so these elites, these leaders in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in Egypt, they would hope the Palestinian issue would go away, would die away. But it was because of October 7th that when Hamas launched the attacks that it did on the European settler colonies and its enclaves, that changed the whole paradigm and the whole dialectic. That the Israeli occupation and murder of Palestinians, which has been going on for over 50 years. This thing didn't just start on October 7th. They've been murdering Palestinians. They've been taking their homes. They've been demonizing them. They've been exiling them for over 50 years, since 1948. When I was born, Israel did not exist. It didn't exist. The original mandate for Palestine was a League of Nations mandate. And what was the League of Nations? It was an attempt by the European nations that had came out from under the old European empires. It was an attempt of the League of these nation states of Europe to make sure that they wouldn't go to war again like they did in World War I, that bled them white, that bled them of their youth, and that bled them of their resources. So they established the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of the modern United Nations. But the League of Nations collapsed. And the League of Nations collapsed because them crackers couldn't stop fighting each other, couldn't stop murdering each other. And they all wanted to divvy up the Ottoman Empire that had come into that had broken up at the end of World War I. So Palestine was given to Britain as a mandate. And Britain is the one that signed the Balfour Agreement and told the Rothschilds and the Ashkenazi Jews of Europe that we got a homeland for you. Now all you got to do is go there and wipe out the Palestinians, and you're good to go. And that's how it started. It started with them same crackers in London that started the United States. Where did the United States come from? It was a European settler state. It was a colonial settler state of Britain, of the British Empire. Where did Australia come from? It came from them same crackers in London. Where did Canada come from? It came from them same crackers in London. Don't get this shit twisted. These crackers been doing this shit since they came out of the industrial age, even before then. Okay, so we need to understand that the fight of the Palestinians is a fight against the mythology and the notion of white supremacy and their right to control other people's territories and their lives and their culture at the expense of those people's history and their lives. So don't get this shit twisted, man. Israel is a Zionist, white supremacist European settler state. And what them crackers are sitting up there talking about from the United Nations Congress is because they on the AIPAC tip. AIPAC is the so-called American Jewish Political Action Committee. That is an agent, that is an unregistered agent of a foreign government. They get their orders and their marching orders from Israel. There is no other political action committee that performs as an agent of the foreign government without registering with the United States Justice Department and registering themselves as the agent of a foreign state, but AIPAC. Okay, and they funnel millions of dollars to black leaders that we have. The Meeks and Hakeem Jeffries and all of them bootlicking niggas up there on the Capitol Hill and the black comprador class, they all on the AIPAC tip. And they support Israel. They get their little jaunts, they take their family to Tel Aviv and they romp in the sun and they get treated like guests. But let one of them speak up against Israel, like Ilmar Ohan and the so-called black representatives and Palestinian representatives that are in Senate, and they become demonized. They're called anti-Semitic. Well, we need to understand that Zionism is ipso facto, it's a matter of fact, an anti-Semitic white supremacist construct, because the only people in Palestine and in Western Asia are Semitic. The Palestinians are the ones who are the original and de facto Semites.
Folks that don't know, AIPAC is the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which amounted to the same thing you said, but, we're just going to give them, lay it out as is. For folks, I know that our brother Mumia had a message for the over 50 encampments that are going on around the U.S. right now, and like I said, over 12 encampments across the world. We know that a couple of days ago, I believe Northwestern and Brown University began to attempt to make some deals with the protesters. From you, as a vet in the game, a brother that's been banging for quite a while, and as you said, existed before the state of Israel existed. What message would you have to the comrades, the students, and the folks who are in these encampments? We know that, there's, as you mentioned, you mentioned the Sudan. We know that there's uprisings in Yemen and the Sahel and the DRC and Myanmar and Haiti and so on and so forth. But what message would you have if you could speak to these folks who are in these encampments that are protesting right now?
Well, I would say, first of all, that, shout out to them. They're taking up the struggle for humanity. They're taking up the struggle against U.S. imperialism and white supremacy and hegemony in regions of the world where the U.S. is only concerned with the resources and the mineral resources of the people there. They are reclaiming the humanity of that their parents and that this system has lost. And I think that they are right in demanding divestment from the military industrial complex and the war machine that is financing the genocide of the Palestinian people. I think that they will begin to realize this, and I think that they need to not so much engage in trying to convince the status quo, the Democratic and the Republican parties of the righteousness of their position, because that's not going to happen. What they need to concern themselves with is the radical history and the radical tradition of which they are now have taken up. I mean, this ain't the first time that Colombia was taken over. It was taken over in a similar fashion against the Vietnam War, and that ended up turning the tide against the U.S. occupation and attempted rape of Southeast Asia and Vietnam. And if we remember, what brought it to a head was the murder of students by the National Guard at Kent State. And I'm saying right now, and I hate to be a prophet of doom, but that's coming here now too. You see, the state are armed. That we are living in a democratic fascist state. We are living in a police state. Dissent is not permitted, and they're using the idea that their property has more rights than people's human rights and their right to life. That taking over a building is breaking a law that's more sacrosanct than the lives of the Palestinian people and the lives of oppressed people. Property rights are only valuable to those who own property. And they're talking about students have a right to go to school and get an education. Well, what is the purpose of a demonstration if it's not to disrupt the status quo and get people to think about things that they wouldn't otherwise think about? I think it's much more important that the university be held to account for supplying arms and support and financial aid to a genocidal racist regime than some knucklehead going to school and studying dance, or going to school, is going to sit down in a history class that's going to lie to them in the first place. Everything has a time and everything has a place. But right now, these students are in the right place at the right time, at the right point in history. And I wish them, and I hold solidarity with them, and that they should not give up their struggle. They should not back down. And they should understand that they're the future of where this country would go. It's not going to go anywhere if they don't take control, if they don't understand that the Democratic and the Republican parties are the parties of the corporate rich, are the parties of war, are the parties of destruction and genocide, and that we need an alternative political party. We need a party that represents the working people of the United States. We need a party that represents the marginalized people of the United States, the different ethnic groups and compositions of the United States. That's the type of sovereign party we need. And we need not to be turned against each other by these pigs in the government who try to make like migrant people are the enemies of black people. That somebody that a Korean that owns a nail salon in New York is somehow robbing black people of their political clout and their finance capital. It's total bullshit. If you go back and look at the U.S. involvement in the West, go back and look at how the U.S. transformed these very nations where the migrants are coming from into hellholes where they cannot live. Look at how Haiti was treated and created by the U.S. and Citibank and all of these entities, how the U.S. occupied Haiti, rendered it useless in terms of being able to support and maintain the livelihood of its own people. This is a history of the U.S. in Latin America, in the Caribbean, and therefore the people that would march through jungles and swamps with their babies on their back to get to the border of the United States in order to try to find a better life for themselves are portrayed now as invaders and criminals and threatening the American dream. Nah, the American dream is black people's nightmare. It has always been our nightmare. And we cannot think that we're going to escape this nightmare as individuals because we're talented, because we could sing, or because we could talk shit in a rap song. We're not going to escape it that way. That's not how we beat the bullwhip days. We got out of it together. We fought together. We stayed together. And we maintained ourselves together. And the only way we're going to survive America is that we fight and we resist America, white supremacy, together. And we have to make it clear to the enemies of our people, to those who would murder us, just like they're murdering the Palestinians, that every time you take a black life, every time you deny a black child education, every time you deny us health care, for every homeless people that exists, we're going to exert a political consequence on those who maintain that system and those policies. And that's my message to those who are on the front lines at these campuses. Don't give up, don't surrender, no peace, no power, no peace. That's what I'm saying. Stay organized, and remember, don't get mad, don't get upset, get even.
Right on, right on. Listen, man, that's the perfect way to close out in traditional Dhoruba Bin Wahad style. You know what I mean? Love you, brother. I appreciate you. I appreciate your insight, direction. I appreciate the errors, you know, the victories, you know what I'm saying, the education, the whole nine, the criticisms, and the whole nine, man. You know, I'm saying that in front of everyone today. You know what I mean? You know, you have definitely assisted in many folks' growth, including myself. So I'm grateful for that, and I'm sure that message to these students and to these professors and to those allies and comrades who are going to these encampments to you know, to hold the line with these organizers. You know, I'm sure that it's appreciated. So with that in mind, we're looking forward to having you back on soon. Might have to bring you on as a regular analyst. You know what I'm saying? You know, don't pay much. However.
If I was doing this for money, man, I would have been in Kamala Harris's front office.
You might be in Kamala Harris' front office with a poster of you, but anyway,
a wanted poster.
Exactly. I'm sure this episode ain't gonna help you. But anyway, brother, be safe, stay on the right side of the barricades. We're gonna win in spite of ourselves. And I'm sure John Lewis is thinking about your comments in his grave right now. And he probably like, that motherfucker. So
oh, bald head pussy. Man, come on, man. You see, this is what I'm saying, man. You brought me to the level of profanity. I thought I was gonna be all dignified and shit, you know, and you had me cussing like a sailor, man. You know.
Hey, brother, I don't even curse no more. Anyway,
I don't curse no more neither. But you got me all worked up, especially when you brought these knuckleheads on talking all these. Man, listen, I don't even want to go there, man.
Anyway, man, I'm gonna talk to you in a minute, man. Be safe. We appreciate you all checking us out. This is RSTV on Black Power Media. Keep on supporting independent Black media. You know what I'm saying? Stay strong. We gonna win. We gonna win. We gonna win. We won't have no goddamn choice but to win. Anyway, we're gonna see you in the whirlwind. RSTV.